All right, good evening, everyone. My name is David Freese. I'm the mayor of Tonganoxie. I call to order this regular meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council for January 18th, 2022. Ms. Huntington, would you note that I am present and call the roll, please?
Rocky Hempel,
Here.
Jacob Dale,
Here.
Laura Lee Stevens,
Here.
Chris Donnelly,
Here.
Jennifer McCutcheon,
Here.
and she is present via phone.
All right, would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Item 2 on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Is there any discussion or questions about the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I would like to note that item 2, the approval of minutes from last meeting, Mr. Dale made a motion to approve the minutes. And with that, I make a motion to approve the minutes from the January 3rd meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Mayor, I'd like to note that I have to abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. All opposed? Any abstentions? Mr. Hempel?
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to item 3, the consent agenda, reviewing of the bill payments. Are there any questions or conversation about the bill payments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hempel. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Moving on to old business. Oh, wait. Mr. Porter, did anyone sign up for open agenda today?
No signups, Mayor.
Thank you. Now on to old business, the swearing in of Councilmember-elect Chris Donnelly. Ms. Huntington.
Mr. Donnelly, will you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and faithfully discharge the duties of City Councilperson.
and faithfully discharge the duties of City Councilperson.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Mr. Donnelly,
Thank you.
thank you for being willing to serve again, and your knowledge is a great help to this body. I really appreciate it.
I'll do the best I can.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to new business, item A, Resolution 01-2202, Mr. Brakovich.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. We have Ben Hart with us here this evening from Baker Tilly, the city's financial advisor, and he can provide a little more detail and answer some questions, should you have any. This is something we've been discussing since the latter part of last year even. And so tonight we've got 3 items essentially before you. To summarize it as best as I can, one item is to issue permanent debt on the Interceptor Sanitary Sewer Project, for which we had previously issued temporary notes to get the project completed, and we use the county's economic development grant to bolster that. And then another item is a refunding that will result in some savings by packaging those two. And then the temp notes, series 2022C, is to actually give us cash to move forward with the water tower project and send that out for bid via RFP. And then that's in conjunction with the EDA grant as well. So with that, Ben, do you want to maybe give a little more detailed analysis of each of those series?
Sure. Thanks, George. Ben Hart, Baker Tilly, Municipal Advisors. Like George said, we typically take a look at any of your refundings to match them up with new bonds to go out. That way you pay less in cost of issuance. You package them up as more efficient in order to go back out to the market. You may have heard here recently where the Federal Reserve getting ready to increase rates in March. This bond issue is going to sell in the beginning of February, so you couldn't pick a better time to go out long-term with the temporary notes, not just the 21 or 22 Cs, but the long-term bonds as well. Even if they do end up increasing rates, we've got to remember that rates for the last 2 years have been at all-time historic lows. In fact, it was almost absurd how low they are. Right now, they're lower than what they had been in the past. So we were running around 2.5%. We're still in the 1 to 1.5% range. And right now, our forecasts are built off of that kind of interest rate for February 7th. The next steps in this, obviously, tonight is the resolution for your consideration. The city will undergo a bond rating here in a couple weeks, and George and Dan will help be involved in that. The sale will take place on the 7th, February 7th, and we'll be back to you with the results of that sale to be able to go ahead and ratify it. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from council?
Yeah, on the, well, it looks like we're at 975 on the long-term bonds and
Yep.
The projected cost on the water, I'm sorry, the water tower was how much?
The latest EOPC, or Engineer's Opinion of Probable Cost, had us a little over 3 million, but that was assuming a worst-case scenario. We worked with BG to get about a targeted true cost of about 2.8 million. And as the EDA grant, we already received the preliminary award that it would be around the 1.5 million mark. We thought this would give us adequate funds to get the project started and completed within this year, and then move towards permanent financing early part of next year.
And so we'll do temp notes, and they're gonna be a couple of years or whatever they're gonna be.
1 year, it'd be 12-month notes, right?
They're basically tied to the overnight rates that are, the Fed's gonna move up in March.
They'll
But
be a
these will be
fixed rate.
fixed rates.
There'll be a fixed rate.
Right.
There won't be any variable at all. So once we auction, and what it is really an auction, a bank
No,
auction.
and I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I totally understand that.
Yeah. So you're ahead of the bank rates going up.
What is the benefit of issuing temporary notes versus go ahead and floating the $3 million now
Sure.
to protect the long-term rate? Because that's gonna be tied to the 10-year treasury, and it went up over 180 for the first time in how many years? A long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And the expectation of that to continue on through the spring and the fall, I mean, summer and fall, with the Fed tapering, stopping the bond side of it.
Right. And there's,
What is our risk of $3 million going out for a bond
So
in a
there's-
year?
there's two answers, I guess, to that answer. There's that question, an A and a B. A is the temporary notes, interest rates, the 12-month notes
It'll be fixed.
are priced somewhat below any kind of treasury. So when the treasury goes up right now, those temporary notes and those rates are kind of staying the same. So that gap is widening from the MMD to that treasury note. And it's not turning around at all. One of the biggest reasons why temporary notes are more efficient than going straight to the long-term bond is when you've got a grant that, like the city does, the EDA grant, and the state and the feds have no experience right now with this kind of money, doling it out, and what that turnaround time on the project's gonna be. So what this allows us to do is fund the project up, get everything done, and then pay the temporary notes off with, partial of the temporary notes off with the grants.
Yep.
So it funds everything up like a construction loan.
And I
you can fund
understand
it up
that.
at a really, really cheap rate.
And one of the things I asked when we talked about this last, George, and I think this is important, is to do a stress test on where's a mathematically a number that sits out there that if we would bond out now versus short-term, what risk do we take if long-term rates jump a full percent? I don't know that it'll do that or won't do it. That's
Right,
gonna
so-
cost us a lot of money in the
Well, it-
long term.
Yeah.
And we haven't done that, and I'm a little bit concerned that we're not doing enough due diligence on this to understand that what's the right move for us to do.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
what is the risk if we see a 50 or 100 basis point swing in the long bond, and it drives the bond up when the temp note comes due and we have to refinance it, we have to pay the piper at that time?
Right.
what's our cost to do that?
Yeah.
Do we have any idea at all
We do.
if we
The-
see any change in interest rates?
50 basis point increase in rates, and I'm going to say in the MMD, not the Treasury, but MMD, any kind of rates we see, the auction rates that are out there that we're going to be participating in. 50 basis point increase on a $1 million note, for instance, for a year is $5,000. So if it's $3,000, obviously, we're sitting at 15,000. Per year.
Over a term of 10 or 15 years,
Well,
depending.
that's per year, right?
Correct.
That's per year on a temporary note. So what you'd be doing is giving up that 15,000 if it goes up by 50 basis points. Right now, it's moving at a quarter basis point since, last November. So I think that's the answer to your question. Now, the long term, who knows what those interest rates are gonna look like. Right now, the long end of the bonds from 10 to 20, they're not moving a whole lot. It's the short end that's kind of bubbling up, if you know what I mean. They're still lower than long end, but the short end of the yield curve is going up a little bit. Yeah.
Understand. Okay, thank you.
Pardon me. Are there any other questions?
Mayor, if I could just add one other additional comment, and Mr. Donnelly, we did get the question, and we did discuss doing a stress test with the financial advisors. The other reason, though, that we think that from a staff perspective, that temp notes work better in this situation is because the project will start and stop this year, and there's still the potential for cost savings to incur. We've been fortunate that a lot of our last few large infrastructure projects have come in substantially below our projected cost. We didn't want to go immediately into a long-term financing situation where we might be off by a significant amount on our projected cost versus what the project actually comes in. So factoring that with what Mr. Hart said, that's why we decided to have a staff recommendation to support the use of temp notes.
Okay.
Any other questions, council? Chris, do you feel comfortable with this?
I don't, without looking at the numbers, I'll do it myself.
Okay.
I want to see the numbers on it, because this is a significant amount of debt in the long term, in the long term. And we're packaging up 1, 2, 3 different series in one motion. And I just think we need to do a little bit more work than we did.
Right now, the longer term rates are around what? You mentioned the temporary are around
They're around
1.5, right?
2.5% to 3%, right?
Okay, so going long-term, we'd be spending, or we'd be paying a full percent, 100 basis points plus
Potentially, right?
for that year. So we'd be paying that now. Of course, if rates go up, rates are gonna go up, but we're saving a little bit by doing the temporary notes versus a year's worth of long-term.
Totally understand that. It's a long-term issue that
Yeah,
I'm concerned
sure,
with, not the
sure.
short term.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Council, do we have any conversation on this? Mr. Donnelly, I look to your leadership on this because of your background, and same with you, Mr. Dale. So I want to make sure you guys are comfortable with what we're doing here tonight.
Mayor, I appreciate that, and I fully understand what we're doing. I want to see if we can quantify what the risk is by just having some targets out there, and it's probably the right thing to do, but there is risk, and we have to understand that, and it could be significant in the long term, because these bonds will be paying on long after you and I are gone. And that $3 million, it could be 2.6 million, or whatever it could be.
Okay.
Long term, that's the one I'm concerned with.
Okay.
And especially in the risk in the market today, I think there's significant interest rate risk in the market.
Okay.
I guess my hesitation would be if we wait much longer to dig in a little bit more, to the numbers, how will we be putting ourselves at risk? How do we know that the interest rates won't go up between now and in whatever meeting that would occur? And then there's another delay from, I mean, I just,
Sure could, and I'm more than likely that we're gonna see a Fed move at the next meeting, which is, 40 to 30 days, something like that.
sure, I mean, but in terms of,
I see the short end go up.
yeah, for the feds, but in terms of our timing, I don't want to put the interest rates at risk for us right now and delaying our discussions.
Okay. Well, at this point, if there are no more questions, no more conversation, I would entertain a motion.
I guess my question is, I do have one question I just thought of. Can we put the temporary bonds one way and then put the rest of them the other way? As far as long-term and locking them in?
Well, the temporary notes are a year.
Year,
And
okay.
that's the most we will be locked in on $3 million or slightly less. I assume we'll go ahead and take it all down. We'll draw 100% of it if we need it or not need it. So we'll pay 100% on the short-term rate now. The long one, we need to lock in now at $975,000. It needs to get locked in now because the interest rates, they've already moved, and you've probably seen a bond rate of 20, 30 basis, well, probably not 30, but increase already in municipal bonds over the last 45 days. So they've already started up.
Okay.
And so the 975 is not an issue at all. We need to get that locked in. The only concern I have is what is that number? Are we willing to take a risk if we see 100 basis point jump in the long bond in 12 months? What's that cost us over the next 10 years on those bonds? George, are we doing 10 on the water tower? Is that what we were talking about? We haven't got that
Well, we
far
haven't,
yet.
yeah, we didn't get that far yet.
So, but we'll probably go more, 10 or more. More than likely, we're gonna be 10 or more. Could be 15, could be 20. It's relative to the city's budget and how things flow. And so what are we doing about that? I think we need to go ahead and get this done, but I think we ought to be looking really carefully at long-term, putting those long-term stuff out as soon as we can to mitigate long-term interest rate risk.
Okay.
We haven't been in an uprate environment in
Long time.
a long time, and we are now in an uprate environment, and it's moving up every day. And so we need to be looking at it, and we need to be studying it, and we need to quantify it to the best of our ability of what the costs are. If we wait, and if it doesn't move, we win. If we wait and it moves 100 basis points, we lose. And we can quantify that in a dollar figure. You just need to understand what that dollar figure is. So I think we need to get this done, but I think we ought to be looking at long-term bonds. We need to be looking at the numbers now because it's $3 million over the next 10 to 20 years. We won't have to deal with, but somebody else will.
Right,
And we need to know what that is.
Okay.
To the best of our ability.
right. Okay. Still looking for a motion on this.
I'll make the motion that we approve resolution 01-2202, authorizing offering of sale of general obligation bond series 2022A, taxable general obligation refunding bonds series 2022B, and the general obligation temporary note 2022C, City of Tonganoxie.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll
Mayor.
second.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hempel.
Yeah, I'd like to add, with Chris's permission, and also authorizing the mayor and assistant city manager to execute and deliver the certificate deeming the primary official statement final to the purchase on behalf of the issuer.
Do you accept that friendly, Mr. Donnelly?
You
Okay,
bet.
thank you.
Thanks.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Ms. Huntington, would you call a roll vote, please?
Rocky Hempel,
Yes.
Jacob Dale,
Yes.
Laura Lee Stevens.
Yes.
Chris Donnelly,
Yes.
Jennifer McCutcheon.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Huntington, and thank you, Mr. Donnelly, for looking into this. I appreciate it. All right, moving on to item B, review 2022 draft request for proposals for water park maintenance. Mr. Brakovich.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. So as we built the budget for this year, we did include a provision for some maintenance down at the water park. And primarily, we were targeting resurfacing the slides and the support structures that give access to the slides as well. And so what we found as we began talking to vendors that do this type of work is that maybe we were a little light on our early cost estimates, and that due to a number of factors, the pricing was going to be a little bit more than we expected. And to kind of ballpark it, I believe we allocated about $50,000 in the budget, and early numbers were suggesting that we needed to be closer to the $75,000 to $100,000 ballpark. So as we're preparing RFP documents, we wanted to bring that back to you, not only for the potential cost increase, but to kind of give us a touch point on the water park. We talk about it frequently, but it'll come up again in the budget because there will be other factors to consider. The pool manager has some operational things that I'm sure he'll want to introduce. So as opposed to just presenting the RFP, I think if you're comfortable with it, we probably have a few, maybe 5 to 7 minutes extra information to give you as kind of a basis before we jump straight into the RFP. So if you're good with that, I'll kind of get that kicked off, and it looks like they're getting the presentation loaded. So what we're here for tonight is, again, what I just touched on, kind of an overview, talk about the previous investments made at the water park, and eventually get to the RFP process, and then maybe talk a little bit real quickly about those operational costs that might be out in the future. So next slide, if you can. There we go. So a quick overview. You probably all recall the current facility was constructed in 2008. You know what the amenities are. They're listed there. That's the larger pool plus some smaller pools for the young children. It is operated on a seasonal basis from Memorial Day through Labor Day weekend, and programming includes swim lessons, facility rentals, local swim team practices, and we always like it when there's competitive events related to the swim teams, and they all come here to our community. Okay, next slide. Previous investments at the water park. So in 2008, it was a $2 million project that the city undertook. The previous infrastructure sales tax paid for that over a 10-year period. Since the time it opened, there's been a few undertakings in terms of maintenance related items, and so the ones that occurred the most frequently were repainting the underwater surfaces. We've done that 4 times. The most recent was just in 2020, and the costs we've had to pay for that range from $12,000 to $28,500. The main pool and the water slide pumps have all been replaced during the time frame from 2008 to last year. In December of 2021, just with this last windstorm, we did get some roof damage, and we're going to go through the insurance process on that. So, and then as I mentioned earlier, what we did factor into the adopted budget for 22 was to do the work and repair on the slides and structures. There's a list there of maintenance items. Those are kind of the routine things that we try to put into our operational costs on an annual basis, and I won't go through each one of those individually. The last slide I'm going to cover, though, is to kind of framework this into then what do we consider operational costs or maintenance versus what you might expect to see on a CMIP list at some point. And so again, on this slide, on the left-hand side, we list those capital-related projects, repainting the surfaces, doing the slides, roof replacement, and then any large-scale technology upgrades that need to occur there. And then versus the maintenance, you have a lot of the painting, we've redone the floors, the other surfaces, locker replacement, just kind of the equipment that gets used on a daily basis there. So why I wanted to touch on all of this is, again, we're talking about doing RFPs on some of the structural repairs, but I don't want to lose, since we're still just in January, we know that there's going to be some additional discussion items that come up for budget for next year or could impact this year. We did factor in a little bit of a cost increase for personnel costs related to the approximate 30 seasonal part-time laborers that we pick up to operate the water park. I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he'll go through some of the funding options, and there's a slide in there that will give you a clear indication of, at least within the last few years, what we've collected in revenue versus what our actual expenses have been. And then I promise we'll eventually get to the RFP item. Dan, go for it.
Thank you, George. All right, the slide, I apologize for the small font on this, but hopefully your printed copy is a little easier to read. We have three main sources of funding we use for needs at the water park. Historically, we've funded some of the larger scale costs, like the repainting, from the infrastructure sales tax proceeds. So that's the 3/4 cent city sales tax that is dedicated to 4 uses, and one of those allowed uses is maintenance on new and existing infrastructure. This is what we used back in 2020 for resurfacing the underwater, and in 2022's budget to help fund the costs that we'll consider as part of this RFP process and project this year. The other funding source from sales tax is the city's share of the county sales tax. One of the eligible uses for that is facility improvements and equipment purchases, both of which we do experience at the water park. Historically, though, we've used that funding source for projects like the Church Street Bridge, which you'll see later on the agenda tonight, and other street repairs and other associated capital projects. So that's an area we haven't drawn from for the water park, but we do have that opportunity if needed for some of these capital needs. And then finally, the general fund supports the operational costs of the water park, and the next slide will highlight that. Available new funds in the general fund are some of the hardest to come by. Those revenue sources don't increase significantly year over year, and there are other demands like police, fire, some public works costs that help compete pretty strongly against the water park for needs out of that funding source. So next slide, this should show you, and I apologize again for the smaller font, this shows you a breakdown, a preview of tonight's financial report. So what it shows is operational revenue in the top chart that totals just under $135,000 in 2021 for the water park season. That's a capture of all of our admissions, concessions, rental fees. Those are the biggest 3 revenues you see there, and lessons and other programming costs. Expenditures, also shown in the central chart. Those you can see outweigh revenues in each case for 2019, 2020, and 2021. 2020 especially outweighs that amount because there were no revenues, or significantly none of significant amount, with the pool closed during the summer. What this is intended to point out is an overview of the lack of profit, I guess, or of even breaking even on running the water park with the general fund. What it doesn't incorporate are things like the cost, long-term cost of the land, but the debt the city paid on it, the interest on that, and in short-term or immediate costs, things like the share of public works staff salaries that support the maintenance of those facilities. So that captures seasonal pool employees in cost and other commodity purchases, contractual purchases. It does not capture some of the staff support that the rest of the city provides. That even includes cashiering at City Hall and other oversight administratively. So when doing this sort of analysis, you can be as detailed or as high level as you want. And this is sort of a mid-level view of the operational comparison of revenue to cost for the facility. I don't really have any other things of note to point out, but we could talk about this now or again later in the financial report if you have specific questions. The intent of showing it was just to give this picture of the general fund and really its inability to add more funding for things like the capital project we're talking about tonight. Any questions before we move on? Go ahead. Okay, next slide, please. So getting to the, George, you want me to keep rolling on? Okay, getting to the RFP scope of work, the initial work by our public works staff to help solicit an understanding of the cost for this project demonstrated that all in, when considering recent bids from contractors to other similarly sized water park owners, if we look at all elevated structures, which you can consider as the water slides, there's two, the slide support structure, including the handrail and steps getting up the structure, the mushroom design feature, shade supports, the poles for that, and any other elevated water place structures like the buckets that pour water. When you take that whole scope into account, our estimated cost, we don't really want to advertise because it gives future bidders too much information of our expectations, but initially, when we did the budget, we looked at somewhere around $50,000. Based on recent quotes, determination, we're seeing maybe double that as our total cost if we do everything in the facility. So what we'd like to propose doing in this RFP is a base bid for just the two slides and the structure. That's the core feature. It's probably the most interacted with safety feature in the park, and thus is the biggest concern. Add alternates, we'd include, again, those mushroom features, shade supports, and any of the other elevated items. They're more aesthetically an issue, and so keeping them in an add alternate would allow the council to get the bids, see what they actually come in at, and make a decision on financing if you want to support a higher cost to get everything refreshed, or just bite it off in chunks, some this year and some in the future. Or you could choose to not accept any of the bids. That's always an option too. We didn't put a lot of detail on the numbers because, again, we don't want to communicate that to future bidders for this in a few weeks with our process. Any questions about this slide? Okay, next slide, please. This schedule just gives you an idea of the draft schedule if we were to go aggressively and try to understand if this contract could be completed before the pool starts. Obviously, in a perfect world, we'd love to get this done in the next couple months, but based on contractor availability, there could be some hesitancy to give us good estimates on work done this year before May. And so what this is prepared to do is give us an aggressive schedule. We do direct outreach to up to 10 bidders that we hope will be bidding on the project and solicit as much interest as we can. That would start with notification tomorrow in the website, newspapers in the next 2 weeks, and then setting a period for question and answers to be completed and shared with all potential bidders. And then the soonest it could come back to the city council under this time frame of an aggressive nature would be February 7th, our next meeting. So Public Works does feel committed that they can make those outreaches and be successful and get a good solicitation of bids. Our estimation then of the contract period would be from the beginning of February through May, but they're likely not going to get started till the weather warms up pretty significantly. Any questions or concerns about that schedule? Another option would be waiting till the fall, but obviously we'd invest as soon as the season closed in an update like this.
I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is, especially in today's atmosphere, that even if we award the lowest bidder, can they get the material in a timely fashion? And I think that needs to be included in the bid.
Okay, certainly.
Because if they can't get what we need to do it,
There's no safety issues. This is just cosmetic stuff and long-term maintenance and.
It is. So with the slides, the finish of those does have some pitting periodically, and our staff do a great job of applying a temporary fix in the seasons where they notice that becoming a possible, not just aesthetic, but skin to slide contact point. But yes, it is important to point that out. It's safe, yes.
I mean, Chris, in the images that were in our packets, some of it does show, places where there are tread markings on the stairs. It's a little worn. My friends with little kids, they talk about, well, it's safe, of course, that, I don't think it would, you know what I mean? I think it's good to keep everything in tip-top shape before a safety issue arises, to be be ahead of the game on that. We wouldn't want anything to occur with the little kids at the pool or the adults at the pool over time.
Next slide, please. All right, our evaluation process is going to be proposed to be similar to previous RFPs for work at the water park and other similar projects across the city. The criteria we have listed are 6, and they're on this slide. Cost is one of them, but it's not the only determinant. And Mr. Hempel, I think your point about making an ability to complete the work and acquire the supplies is one that we can address with item 3, demonstrated ability to complete the work. And we can specifically ask that question if it's not provided in those responses. All right, so we can move to the next slide, Lindsay. So switching gears a little from the RFP topic, which again is what we're asking for approval to move forward with tonight. Operations and fees are an area that George alluded to earlier in this presentation. Our staffing levels have been successfully filled in the past couple of operational seasons, but Mr. Shoup, our water park manager each season, has reported that other facilities have done staff payment increases to the hourly rate, and ours have stayed very stagnant, just like our fees have for a lot of years. And we've still been successful, but that's something that he's advocated for and would like to have a longer discussion with you about potentially making some adjustments. I think our fee structure was last updated in 2011, and really that was just the rental fees. Things before that were back when the water park opened in 2008, the new water park. So we're well out of date in a sense of comparison, but as I showed earlier, the pool does not make money or recover, 100%. So there is a little bit of policy leeway that the council enjoys with deciding how to make it potentially cheaper for local residents, taxpayers who pay property and sales tax here in the community to enjoy an affordable way to enjoy the water park. So Mr. Shoup's also proposing to look at those fees. I think rounding off some of the numbers would be a good idea. We've charged $37.50 for swim lessons for 14 years, and that's not a round number. It hasn't increased at all with the cost of our staff that do the training that have been here for many years. So we have a few small things like that that especially make sense. Rentals are really popular, and rental fees for other facilities have gone up in 14 years. So there's some items to consider there certainly that we can look at in quick haste if we're going to make any changes by this May. Next slide. And so to recap again, sorry for so much information, but we thought it was important to give you that overview and a detailed dive. But what we're looking for tonight, I think we've gotten some great feedback on the proposed RFP. I saw nods and support for the accelerated schedule this spring, and I didn't hear any opposition to the proposed base bid and an ad alternate. So if that is the consensus of the group, we'd love to have a motion to authorize staff to release that tomorrow and bring it back to you in early February. But happy to answer any questions you might still have.
Council, any questions? Any conversation?
Well, you're gonna hit the financial part of it when we go through your sheets here.
Certainly will, yes.
So we're ready for a motion, is that correct?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay. Anybody have
I
a
make a
motion?
motion to authorize staff to issue draft request for proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. For the minutes and for budget retreat, could we make note of this? To discuss the maintenance budget so that we're not pulling out of the infrastructure fund every 2 years. We definitely need to discuss raising prices. And I'm concerned about, this is a mostly cash-only business, and I don't know who is in charge of the tiller, or of the till, I mean. So I think we ought to explore some new methods of payments, such as cards or something like that, just to make sure everything's above board. But that's a discussion for budget time.
Certainly, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Item D, Church Street Bridge Replacement Project, Mr. Brakovich.
Actually, Mayor,
Did I skip one? I apologize.
yeah,
Item C,
item C.
consider approval of 22 expenditure and revenue budget amendment to the police equipment fund.
Yeah, so this is, and Chief Lawson's here, and I think he and Dan can handle the presentation on this, but this is great news. The police department applied for a firehouse sub-grant. That's confusing, because it's not a sub-grant, I mean like a sub, like a sandwich from Firehouse Subs sandwich place. And so the police department applied for a certain amount of funding, right around, I think, $25,000 to purchase some new Motorola radios. And so Chief has a plan to use the grant in addition with some of his police capital fund that's available to outfit the entire department with brand new radios. So Chief or Dan, do you guys want to take it over from there?
Yes, thank you, George. I'll kick us off if that's all right, Chief. The good news was, in this case, obviously, we received a outstanding grant of just under $25,000 from Firehouse Subs Foundation. The interesting news for budget is that we didn't plan on receiving a $25,000 grant in full this year. So what we're requesting in one of the two motions included in your agenda packet is an approval of a revised 2022 revenue and expenditure budget for the police equipment fund that will accommodate the grant receipts. They'll come to the city, and then we'll expend those funds along with an additional just under $21,000 in funding from the city's police equipment fund. So that budget amendment is in that fund alone, and it doesn't require publication or public hearing. We just need to have a simple motion by the city council. So that on a budget side is what we're requesting tonight. And the agenda statement includes a little bit more information. But in terms of describing the equipment or the procurement with our vendor that we need to use for this, I'd turn it over to Chief Lawson for a quick description of that, if you'd like.
Thank you, Dan. Well, thank you, council. Just kind of go back, kind of elaborate a little bit on Dan had told the council here. Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation opens up a grant periodically. It's usually once a quarter to any kind of public safety, whether that be fire or police, to ask for specialized equipment that is kind of outside the budget. And so what we did is we applied for that grant. And not to bore you with the specifics, but some of the kind of the exciting things about the grant that Firehouse liked about our proposal is the handheld radios, which we call walkie-talkies. Most of us are really outdated. They're about 12 years old, and they were actually purchased by Leavenworth County and kind of helped us along about 12 years ago. They're obsolete. They don't even make parts for them. In fact, when we have to have a repair, we have to send in one walkie-talkie with another one. Like, this is a good one, but it's expendable to take parts out of this one to put in 2 or 3 different other ones. So it's kind of a taxing process. So we described that to Firehouse Subs Public Safety Grant Foundation. And what our proposal is to take a lot of the remaining radios and place them in Tonganoxie USD 464 schools in the event of a catastrophe. And that could be an active shooter assailant, that could be a tornado, that could be any kind of emergency where they needed to reach out to the police and be able to communicate relatively quickly. Now, we plan on removing the confidential channels out of the radios, meaning that if we're running a person's criminal history or something like that, that's not accessible to anyone that's listening to that device. But we have something we call it's a talk around channel that would be very effective, God forbid, in the event that we had someone inside the schools and we needed to know real-time information from school staff. And so what our plan is to put at least 3 to 5 of those inside the schools of our old radios. And with less use, we're gonna hope for less probability for those to break. And so they will be sitting in there for the principal and any kind of upper echelon staff to be able to utilize those pretty quickly. So I think the grant proposal that we wrote up was well received by Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation. So that was the great news, $25,000 sent over our way. And so we're gonna do a Facebook news release tonight if the council approves of the proposal to spend that money. And we want to publicly, if anyone from Firehouse is watching our Facebook live feed, we want to say how much we incredibly appreciate the opportunity to spend that money, and how gracious they were to give them to give it to us, and how much it's going to really benefit our community. I think that I've talked about in budget the last 3 or 4 times our need for handheld walkie-talkie radios, and that this is really kind of beyond a CMIP, that because it's going to be a lot of money. So this was hugely welcomed by us. And so George and Dan and I started looking in the public safety, some of our budgetary stuff, and one being the Law Enforcement Trust Fund. When I first got to be chief here, we started kind of saving that money away from drug seizures of the last administration and myself, and really being choosy about not spending that money, which equates to right around $7,000. And so what our proposal is to match the firehouse sub-grant for $27,000 in addition to the $25,000. The $25,000 that we're gonna match of the 27 is gonna be used to buy 7 additional radios. That will equip all of my officers with a handheld radio and give us 1 spare. The remaining $2,000 is gonna be for applicable hardware like microphones that you see the officers wear that they pin to their shirts. It's also gonna be spent on programming, and it's also gonna be spent on extra batteries, things like that, extra hardware that's gonna need to make those things operational as soon as possible. So, simple math, $25,000 we're wanting to spend the grant, and then to get the budget authority to spend another $27,000 to match those radios and kind of equip us all with the needed equipment. And that's kind of all I had, and I'd love to take questions if you have any.
Chief, thank you so much for applying for that grant. That's $2 for every 1 tax dollar.
Well, thank you for
That's
saying so, Mayor.
fantastic. Thank you.
It was our pleasure, thank you.
Any questions?
So make sure I think I got this right. The amendment, you don't have a page number here, it shows on my 43. So we're amending the revenue side by 22,226, and that's just raising from 2,000 to equal the grant.
Exactly, yes.
And then we're increasing on the expenditure side, we're actually reducing 1 line item by $5,000. But then we're increasing the overall, so our expenditure will actually go from a budget of 12 to a budget of 62, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
gotcha, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Chief, appreciate it.
Thank you so very much.
Seeing no questions, I would entertain a motion.
You want, we need two motions,
motions.
correct?
Yep.
So I'll make a motion to approve the 2022 revenue and expenditure budget amendment for the police equipment fund as described in the agenda attachment.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
Second.
I heard Ms. Stevens first.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? There's a second motion we need for this. Anybody?
Is the motion on the last page still current?
It is approve the purchase of Motorola radios
Yes.
and other equipment, yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the purchase of Motorola radios and other associated equipment from Motorola using a combination of grant funds, law enforcement, trust funds, and police equipment fund resources for a total cost not to exceed $52,000.
Thank you, Mr. Hempel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
I lost my agenda for a second. Hang on a second. George, Mr. Brackus,
Yep.
what's the next item?
Sure, Mayor. So now we're to item D, which is the 2022 Church Street Bridge Replacement Project Update. And so we've got Brian Kingsley and Brady Hedstrom here with BG. We've been working closely with both of them. And actually, there should be a memo in your packet from Brady that kind of outlines some of the work. And so as we're pulling that up for a presentation and he can walk through the details of it, I thought I'd just give you a quick history of where we are with this bridge replacement. So back in 2020, we were going through our CMIP and prioritizing projects based on our broad categories. And the city council prioritized the Church Street Bridge as the #1 replacement option. And so as we began to look at that and associate costs with it, we were at a cost of just under $500,000 on replacing that bridge. The more we looked at that, and then we had even development projects that popped up upstream from that, BG asked us to take another look at kind of the upstream and downstream impacts that might occur in that area. And so last summer, the city council approved, we moved forward with a survey and analysis of stormwater in that area. And so that report was completed towards the end of the year and submitted with some proposed changes to not only the bridge replacement, but the channelization work that would need to occur both upstream and downstream. And so that takes that cost to around approximately $700,000. So I wanted to give you that background in case you were still remembering the number we plugged in back in 2020 or early 21 and why there's a change. And Brady can go through a lot of that detail, and you'll see there's photos, and I think if you looked at the packet, and you know that we have some bank issues, especially along Ann Street, and all of those have contributed to cost increase. When you really look at the price just of the bridge itself, the culvert, that hasn't changed that much, but there's been additional scope added to this project. So with that, I'd ask Brady to come up and you can walk through the analysis that's provided in your packet. Brady, go for it.
Good evening. So I assume since you guys got, is that good? Yeah. Copies that you're able to review, the memo outlining the study we did. You're familiar with the problems that there are with the site. The structure itself is aged, heavily deteriorated. It is perched above the channel flow line. The channel has degraded the flow line of the channel over the years. And then the channel itself, and I don't know if you wanted to flip to that, the photos in the appendix A has photos of the existing structure and the channel. But the channel running parallel to Ann Street there has really encroached on the south edge of Ann Street, or that's the north edge. The north edge of Ann Street. Yep, threatening utilities there. So you can see the floor of the structure there. You can see looking along Ann Street. I'm sure you guys have been out there. That channel is migrating south against the road, threatening the utility infrastructure that's along there and the road itself. So what we did as far as a survey and analysis is we went from upstream, just upstream west of the Highway 24 crossing where the channel crosses the state highway. So it flows from west to east to Tonganoxie Creek. And so we went from upstream of the highway crossing down to the confluence of that tributary with Tonganoxie Creek. Surveyed cross sections and the bridge site here, did hydraulic analysis utilizing HECRAS, which is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers kind of industry standard software. Looked at structure size and bank armoring alternatives, and ended up establishing a slight increase in structure size to maintain water surface elevations that are fairly close to what is existing through that reach of the channel. There are so a couple more pages there in Appendix B. There's some cross sections of the channel. The next page there. So on that page, you can see, if you like visuals, this would be looking down the channel, back toward Church Street, to the west, where Ann Street is to the left side. You can see the channel existing surface is the dashed line is over right against Ann Street. What our proposed improvements are is to add some shoulder on Ann Street, flatten that bank slope out, move the channel bottom north, and then armor with riprap or rock the channel to help it maintain its alignment there. That rock will also slow velocities some and reduce erosion potential. The next page, Appendix C, has some kind of examples just for visuals of what a rock-lined channel is going to look like. You saw in the existing pictures that it was very overgrown with brush and trees currently. Well, to do this work, you'll be clearing out a bunch of that timber and brush through there, and it will be then rock-lined and open, kind of like you see on these two pictures on this sheet. And as I mentioned, the new structure will be on Church Street will be slightly larger, will be taller primarily, so that the new bottom can be below where the channel bottom has eroded to at this point. For permitting purposes, the Corps of Engineers and Wildlife and Parks like to see culvert bottoms embedded below channel floor to allow a natural channel through the structure and passage for aquatic organisms and those kind of things. So I don't know if that was a sufficiently detailed explanation of the issues you have and kind of what our study entailed and what our recommendations are, and if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hempel brought this up to me earlier. KDHE is going to have to be involved, correct? Because we're dealing with water downstream.
Well, so as far as stormwater runoff, we would, I looked briefly at the amount of area that we would be disturbing, and I did not anticipate. Their guidelines are if you disturb more than 1 acre as a total for the project, that you would need a stormwater discharge permit, and I did not anticipate disturbing an acre. I do not believe that Tonganoxie Creek is a like exceptional state water or one that's going to require a water quality like management or monitoring during construction. I can't swear to that. I haven't looked at that list, but I don't think it is.
Okay.
So I wouldn't anticipate issues with KDHE as far as permitting the work.
Okay, and from your pictures, are all those trees going to be cleared out along the creek?
Yes. And I didn't mention that the part of the channel downstream of the Church Street structure is on private property. So there will have to acquire either easement to do the work or acquire the property and city maintain ownership of it. So there's 2 landowners that would be impacted downstream of the structure. The parcel upstream of the structure is actually city-owned because we were looking at improving the channel for, I think it was about 75, 80 feet upstream of the structure, and then a couple hundred feet, about 250 feet downstream of the structure. Your question was about the trees, though. Yeah, to move the channel over, everything that's currently between the channel and Ann Street would come out to rebuild that slope there. There are some trees further to the north in that property owner's yard that could be saved, but yeah, the ones right down along the channel and between the channel and Ann Street would be coming out, and that's why wanted to make sure to mention that and provide kind of some examples of what a rock line channel is going to look like, so nobody's surprised when, you know,
Right.
those come out.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we aware that a 2-inch rain floods that thing all the way up to the bank?
So our analysis indicated that even a 100-year rainfall did not overtop Church Street or Ann Street. And I guess the feedback I got from the city was that they had never seen the streets overtop down there. Now I'm sure compared to what it usually flows, which is probably very little, you know, a couple inch rain would bring it up significantly. But my, I guess, understanding, and it seemed to check out with our modeling as well, is that even the 100-year rainfall event did not flood that residence to the north or overtop Church Street or Ann Street. And if anybody had any, I guess, high water marks or anecdotal evidence otherwise, you know, we'd be open to hearing that. But
You might have a conversation, or someone might have a conversation with that property owner, because I'm not sure that that's quite accurate.
okay.
Just throwing that out there. Any other questions?
Yeah, now when we're not realigning, we are realigning the channel somewhat, right?
Yes.
We're moving it over just to, and it makes sense, your drawings are excellent, and by the way, this is great, this is good stuff. So are we going more than 300 foot of that in length, realigning that channel?
Nope, was just going downstream from Church Street. And if you actually go back into the body of the,
Yeah, I was trying to look on that map and see how long that was where we were messing with it, because
Yeah.
it looks like, I couldn't really tell. We mess with 300 foot, we're gonna have to do something different than we would if we realign a channel. Having had to unfortunately deal with this more than once.
you're talking about permitting through,
Permitting and who
Department
we
of
gotta
Ag,
deal with, and
Division of Water Resources.
we don't have to buy any mitigation credits or anything for messing around with this thing.
Yeah, no, not that I'm, so this figure here shows kind of the realigned.
Right.
Alignment, and by realign, we're just moving it slightly north, away from Ann Street there. Whereas, and I don't know if you can see Ann Street down there. I have a little pointer. Yeah, there you can see is Ann
Yeah.
Street, and the
Yeah.
current bank, you know, is right against the edge of the road there. And the new alignment is gonna just straighten this out.
How long would that be?
Soften that curve there. And
About
so
an acre.
that was,
100 foot or so?
well, no, it was about 250 foot downstream of the structure. And then, I thought I had put that number in, but that's what I recalled was about 250 feet downstream of the structure, and then 75, 80 feet upstream of the Church Street structure. But I can. Yeah, so we are anticipating permitting with the Kansas Department of Ag, Division of Water Resources.
Yeah.
And we can initiate, you know, correspondence with their coordination with them sooner than later and make sure that something unexpected, you know, isn't gonna come up, but,
Well, the last time I did that, a couple of years ago, or wanted to do it, they wanted mitigation credits over 300 foot.
okay.
For doing almost exactly the same thing.
Okay.
And we were 320 feet or something and trying to correct a few lots, and now that may have changed, but the mitigation credits were stupid.
Or being in combination with a transportation infrastructure, you know, bridge
Yeah.
replacement project, might have a little different.
Yeah, that's good
requirements,
point.
but
And then the other thing
we'll
on,
look into that.
on your statement here, so we're actually going underneath the bottom of that, the water's going underneath the bottom of that existing box.
It's,
If I'm reading that correctly.
the floor is perched.
Yeah, it's up.
The water's not flowing underneath it yet, though. There's typically toe walls on the end of the
Okay.
structure, but it's just that the water has to pool on one side.
Fill up and,
Yeah, and like your mayor mentioned, water comes up pretty quick and goes over and then goes back down. But that just perched floor inhibits, you know, aquatic organisms and stuff traveling up
needs
the
some
channel
work.
bottom.
it's pretty worse shape than we thought it was, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yuck.
Any other questions?
Thanks for the update.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Good stuff.
You're welcome.
Mayor, I might interject that there's no agenda statement provided, but staff do have a copy of the contract proposed for engineering design. So like George mentioned, you've previously last summer approved the contract for surveying and extra sort of pre-design work, but the contract included in the packet as a late ad and also printed for your review shows an amount not to exceed $33,000 for the design phase of the project. And getting that accomplished would then put us towards bidding out the project upon completion of that. So we'd look for a motion at your privilege to make for that.
Okay. Does anyone have a motion?
So we need a motion to approve engineering for
The design
the
design
design
phase.
not to exceed 33,000?
That's correct. That's
I would
correct.
make that motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. All in favor, say aye.
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 Got a question.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hempel. Go ahead.
How about a future walkway on this? Will it be designed with a future walkway in mind, or what will it include? Whether it'll be attached to the bridge or be a separate walkway? Has any consideration been
Yes, so I
assigned
mentioned.
towards that category?
Yeah, I mentioned that we did, the existing structure is just 24 feet wide right now. You got 2 lanes of the street across it and some concrete rail. The structure that we modeled in our hydraulic modeling, because the length of the structure does have some impact on the hydraulic performance of it. We modeled a 45-foot long structure, which would, the goal was to put the hub guards or the ends of the structure far enough away from the edge of the roadway to not need guardrail, things that are a maintenance issue. And that also leaves enough room for a 5-foot sidewalk on one side of the structure. If we thought there was interest in having sidewalk on both sides. Currently, there's no sidewalk infrastructure down there in that part of
That'd
town.
be fine.
So it's hard to know what, future infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure is gonna look like down there, but we were planning on making the structure wide enough to accommodate sidewalk on at least one side.
Okay,
And I suppose.
so that's where the sidewalk's coming in, going across the bridge then?
Yes, so there would be from the edge of the road pavement, there'd be a green space, 4 to 5 foot green space, 5 foot of sidewalk. And then green space between the sidewalk and the edge of the bridge structure. And then there would be a handrail or fence, either pipe rail or chain link around the drop-off. But it's far enough away from the road, it wouldn't need to be a vehicular guardrail.
Okay,
So yes, that was.
thank you.
considered. Yep.
Okay, we had the vote. It sounded unanimous. After Mr. Hempel's question, does anyone care to change their vote?
No, and I'll vote yes also.
Okay,
it
motion
unanimous.
passes unanimously. Thank you very much. City manager agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. We do have one item listed there, and it's the financial report for December. And as Mr. Porter is getting that ready, I did want to add one additional item. I participated in the Leavenworth County Port Authority Board meeting this morning, and a gentleman named Tom Cole introduced himself, and I believe he is a new county employee. And I think he described his job title as Administrator of Economic Development for the county. I've not met Mr. Cole. I'm not sure what duties the county has assigned to him, but I look forward to meeting with him and seeing what value add that county position has for us. Along the same notes, the LCDC board president announced that they're kind of in the final stages of their interviews and hoping to hire a new executive director to replace Steve Jack, who retired at the end of the year. So with that, Mr. Porter, are you ready for the December report?
I think we are. Thank you,
Great.
George. The report is also included on the agenda packet as a late ad and available at the dais for everyone's review. I'll be brief, but feel free to stop me if you have any particular questions. One highlight will be the water park revenue and expenditure analysis. So I'll be especially brief on the other sections here. This report is representative of our unaudited financial statements for the entirety of 2021, 100% of our fiscal year, which concluded at the end of December. We've collected 110% of revenues in all funds and spent only 86% of expenditure authority in all budgeted funds. We met our debt service obligations in full and on time, which is always an achievement every year. We also,
Excuse me, Mr. Porter.
Yes.
I am so sorry. I need to take this phone call. Mr. Hempel, can you take it from here?
Sure.
I really apologize.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. The highlighted items I'd like to point out include our 2021 budget amendments, which were completed earlier in the year, not at the end of the year, as we sometimes have needed to do based on changes. I want to also point out that 2 funds exceeded the planned expenditure amounts in 2021 by a slight amount. Each fund, though, did not exceed our legal budget authority submitted to the state each year. Those 2 were the general fund and the library operations fund. We've talked a little bit more about the rationale behind both of those in the past. The first is the library operations fund with additional property tax proceeds in December that we collect and remit on to the library. Typically, because of delays from the county, we've slowed that down and not completed it till the January of the following year. This year, we were able, with just a slim margin of budget authority, to get that done in December and right-size our collection and remittance of tax with the fiscal year. The second is the general fund. We had some unplanned expenditures this year that took us over the planned amount, but did not take us over the state limit. Some of those, you'll recall, are pretty extensive cost for abatement of codes properties too on the same street this year. And those, along with things like the earlier than the end of the year addition of a full-time firefighter position, took us over that planned level, but again, well below still our state limit for the year. Our ARPA funds we've talked about in prior years, or prior months, excuse me, but we do maintain those funds, and I'll point them out a little later in the report as well. The next slide shows major revenues and expenditures. You can see that our water operations and sewer operations fund ended the year really close to our revenue projections. Special highway and our debt bond and interest fund actually came in well above budget, and the general fund as well. So we've seen strong revenue performance. We've kept conservative budget estimates, which is one of the reasons you see that margin. And again, that's one of the biggest reasons we have really strong fund balance levels that we'll highlight as well. Major fund expenditures, you can see there, the general fund, water, sewer, special highway, and debt fund. And again, there's that margin I talked about with a little over 10% remaining for the general fund. We do have some authority still remaining for the water fund. We didn't realize some of that had to do with capital projects at the water plant and at the new water tower project that simply are going to happen this year instead of in 2021. Special highway and debt bond and interest were a little tighter to budget, but both still comfortably within margins. Moving to the next page. Any questions? I'm rushing, I know, but moving to the next page. Major revenue performance. There's nothing really novel compared to last month on this slide. I'd like to point out our sales tax was a strong performance increase year over year. We continue to see compensating use tax driving that, and you can see that in the comparison for the city sales tax alone. The city sales was 13% increase over the prior year, which is really outstanding, but city use tax, you can see, was 30% change from the prior year. Some of that we attribute to pandemic changes to people's shopping habits, them buying destinations. Instead of driving there to pick it up or buy it, they ship it to their home. But another thing I think we see is large trends in volume of people remitting compensating use tax. The laws have been on the books in Kansas long enough that require vendors over a certain threshold to remit use tax, that we've seen steady increases and really tremendous leaps and bounds of the number of vendors that pay for purchases our citizens make that get delivered here or the equivalent of that through online vendors especially. When we look through reports to see individual companies or other outside companies that we think might be the biggest reason for these changes, we really aren't seeing that. There's no single generator of more of this sales tax. It's really been the volume of remittances that we're seeing month to month comparison and year to year. Franchise fees, we're up 5% compared to last year, and we're 110% of budget, which is great in the general fund for a share of the total revenues collected by other utilities besides city utilities. And building permits and special highway didn't have a lot of movement since last month, so I won't highlight those. So page 2 of the main body of the report really has the meat of the pool operational revenue versus expenditures. As I described earlier, the top chart illustrates revenue year by year over the last 3 years, one of which was not operational, so you can see a very low level of revenue that year in 2020. The second chart shows a breakout of the expenditures by category. A couple things I want to point out for 2021. We saw huge increases in the cost of chemicals. That's one of the biggest commodity line items. And not only did we need to order more chemicals because everything we had stockpiled from 2019 expired and wasn't safe to use in 2021, we also saw that just the unit cost had gone up. So that's something that unfortunately we've seen a trend in, and I think we can project to still see that. Pools also were scrambling to acquire that with supply shortfalls and increased need as more pools open back up after a year of many pools being closed. The other item I want to point out is our overall net revenue compared to expenditure, which you can see in the third chart in the top row. So in 2019, it was just under $17,500 loss in comparison. 2020 was an outlier, and that was a little over $22,000 with the costs we couldn't avoid and needed to pay on the facility and insurance and other things. And then in 2021, we have a loss of just under $26,000. While that's an increase of a little over $8,000 from 2019, I want to also point out that in chemicals alone, we saw an over $10,000 increase in costs. So really, the facility was, I think, prudently managed to minimize cost overrun. And so while that did increase that gap of profit versus income, I think some of the things we see that minimize that jump were huge increases in interest and rentals. Darren Shoup reported many times that our rentals were at unprecedented rates. So while the revenue we got didn't go up, the interest and the bookings were really solid through 2021. And so that's an area, if we're going to look at opportunities to raise rates and maybe collect more revenue, that's a primary focus area, other than concessions and daily admissions that are also opportunities. The other thing I'd probably point out is these numbers don't reflect the resurfacing of the pool. Like I mentioned earlier tonight, that $28,500 cost was infrastructure sales tax proceeds fully funded. And again, in 2022, our RFP for elevated structures is also not there. So this is an operational, year-to-year operations, all revenue for the facility versus the operations side, not capital, basically.
Do you think we're going to, is it the general consensus that, we jumped an operating loss on this up to 27,000, whatever it was? Absent a change in the revenue side of it, are those expenses more than likely, you think, going to stay what they are? I mean, we don't see any signs of chemicals coming back.
I've yet to see a pool bill go down in my tenure with the city, unfortunately.
So we more than likely, as we get into budget for next year, we're going to be talking about a bigger loss ongoing, which.
Yeah. A bigger drain on the general fund.
The
Yeah.
other side we have to talk about, yeah.
I think reevaluating lessons and rentals, which are two programs that we see huge interest in and book up, I think. One, shift demand. I think once you fiddle with admissions and sometimes concession fees too much, you obviously drive, with that elastic nature of those, you drive changes in how people choose to attend or not. But yeah, I think that shows in just the operating loss every year growing, probably a need to reevaluate our fees a little more frequently than every 14 years.
Just off subject of the pool, did we see the same level of chemical increase at the water plant?
I don't know the
Probably
exact
so.
numbers, but we have seen somewhat higher. I know there was a particular shortfall with water parks when they all opened after a majority actually were shut down. So the suppliers just didn't react quickly to that circumstance.
Couldn't find them for a long time.
We ordered early, so we were worried we wouldn't have them and we'd have an untreated pool. That wouldn't have been a good situation.
Now, you did mention, though, that some of that was.
Startup.
Was
Yeah.
basically starting from nothing.
Yep.
Yeah, so theoretically, it might go down a bit, but not, I mean, probably somewhat negligible.
Yeah.
But, I mean, any little bit helps.
Yeah, it was a just over 100% increase from 19 to 20 in total expenses for chemicals. Yeah. But hopefully it will not exceed or meet that number next year. Yes. Any other questions on this before we? Okay.
Good report.
Yeah, the next few pages I won't dally on. The 2021 budget initiatives, we've seen this in recent monthly reports. 2022 initiatives, I actually highlighted 3 that on that page that we are addressing or will address this evening. The police radios is a late ad, and we're really excited about that, as the chief mentioned earlier tonight. And then the 2023 budget timeline is on there as a placeholder, and we'll keep the council updated as we schedule those meetings. But we have less than 2 months until our first touch point, so it's hard to believe we're already there. But we've got some good notes on the mayor's comment earlier, too, about a topic for the first touch point at the spring retreat. The last page of the report is the fund balance levels. Again, I mentioned we have really strong performance in all our funds, especially some of our key budgeted funds. I want to point out just a couple, and then I'll conclude because I know I'm going a little over here. On that page, the second to the bottom is the ARPA fund. So that's our separate accounting and a non-budgeted fund for ARPA proceeds. And you can see with some level of expenditures in 2021 that included premium pay for essential employees, we still have, from our first half of funding, a little under $340,000 remaining to spend in programmed uses according to the restrictions. The other one of note that is new and you wouldn't see on a budget report because it's not a budgeted fund is RHID number 1 for schoolyard townhomes. That RHID has seen incremental value added. And so the way that will work is the city will collect that separately from the county, and then we remit basically 98% of it back to the developer according to that RHID agreement each year. So this year it wasn't a full kind of normal year, but you can see we have $22 in fees that we're allowed to keep and later use. So that'll grow over time, obviously, but just wanted to point out that so you knew it was going on and progressing nicely.
How long is that, 10 year?
It is.
Just off the top of your head.
On schoolyard, I think I think it's a 20-year
20,
one.
okay.
With maybe an early termination if they
Yes,
reach.
we cap the amount they were eligible, so once they hit their cap, we'll cut it off.
That'd be 18, yeah. No other significant items of note, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Overall for the year, really excited at how the city's financials performed and gives us a lot of leverage as we look at this year and next year for pressing needs in the community that we can devote resources to.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. I have a question. Can we fill out this 2021 budget initiatives progress report and by getting the money to the Historical Society?
Yes, Mayor, that, rather than remitting the funds to them, we do have some legwork with our Public Works Director on the sign installs. So the procurement we'll make directly to the vendor, but it didn't happen before year end, but we'll get it done quickly, so we're not waiting on it still.
Good,
Yes.
thank you. Anything further?
Good stuff, Dan.
Yeah, that's a good report. Okay. That was city manager agenda, city attorney agenda.
I have no items, Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem agenda.
None.
City council agenda. Anything? Okay, the mayor agenda. I would like to reappoint Mr. Donnelly as the City of Tonganoxie's representative on the Leavenworth County Port Authority Board, if he is willing to serve.
Well, I appreciate that. I would be more than happy to help if the council so sees fit. I think there'll be some challenges ahead with the adjustments made with the county, but as George said, we'll just have to explore how that's all gonna work. With Port Authority's done great, and along with LCDC, obviously, we've done well, so be happy to help if you have.
Is there a motion to approve that appointment?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hempel. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Oh, I abstain, sorry.
Any abstentions? All right, Mr. Donnelly abstained. Thank you. Number 2, consider reappointment of Megan Vestal and Angela Bolin to the city resident positions on the Tonganoxie Public Library Board with 4-year terms. I would like to reappoint them. They've been good board members who show up and do the work.
Great. I'll make that motion to approve the mayor's request.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. And Mr. Hempel, do you have something for us?
Yes, executive session. I move that city council recess into executive session to discuss city manager's annual review process pursuant to personnel matter of non-elected personnel exception KSA 75-4319B1. The open meeting will resume in city council chambers at, how long do we need?
Let's say 1:45.
8:40
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
8:45?
Is that too long?
I think 20 minutes would be 8:49 possibly.
Excuse me?
Should we say we'll come back at 8:45?
Yeah, let's be back at 8:45.
Okay.
That's late.
17 minutes.
The executive session will include city attorney, city manager, assistant city manager, city council, and the mayor.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 The luncheon, yeah.
Okay, we're back in session. Let the record show that no motion, no binding action was taken in the executive session. That's the end of the mayor's agenda. Mr. Dale,
I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
who's in favor? Is there a second?
Second.
Yep.